Well, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Carter.
Mr. Chairman, if I might,
Point of order?
and I'm just asking, are you basically suspending that rule, or what's?
Look, I have since the beginning, and this is the last time I'm going to answer this question today, Mr. Ivey, allowed people to continue a question train of thought that extends outside their time. I've done that on both sides of the aisle, and I am not going to articulate or waste any more of these gentlemen and this gentlelady's time defining the policy as I've executed it since the beginning of my chairmanship.
Well,
I think now the next person we're recognizing. You are not recognized, Mr. Ivey.
Well,
you are not
sorry, but if
you are not recognized.
you're not following the rules that we voted
order,
on and accepted,
the ranking member is
at the beginning.
recognized.
Mr. Chairman, we adopted a set of rules, and I try not
Okay.
to get involved. I have to
Go ahead.
explain my point of order.
Go ahead.
And the rules clearly specify everything that's being raised.
I have never once, Mr. Ranking Member,
I
heard.
have not completed.
Finish your thought.
Thank you. So I'm saying that we adopted the rules on how we conduct business. And anytime a member raises the question, it's consistent with the rules. Now, if that becomes a problem, then I think we have to modify our rules, because that's how we operate. That's what Congresses are required to do. That's what committees are required to do. And for people to ignore the rules is inconsistent with the rule. So I'm just saying to you, follow the rules that we adopted.
Yeah, we're going to continue the policy as I have been doing it since I've been the chairman. Okay, if you're in the midst of a thought, we're going to let you go past your time. And number two, I haven't heard anyone raise an issue on the left when I've allowed people on the left to go over time. Not once, Mr. Ivey, have you said when one of your members has gone over 5 minutes, the person's time is up. Fascinating to me that you're only doing it when it's on this side of the aisle.
If I might have a chance to
Please.
be heard.
Yes.
All I'm saying is that under the rules, we have a right to raise the point of order when somebody goes over the time. You've used your discretion to permit additional questioning if you want to, but to say I can never raise a point of order that's consistent with the rules doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's just a clear violation of the rules that were adopted. And by the way, the rules were adopted, I don't think they were adopted unanimously. There was a Republican decision to adopt these rules. So these are your rules.
No doubt about it. But the point I'm making is it's intriguing to me that we're consuming this time over this issue while I've never once heard you raise the issue when I've allowed Ms. Jackson Lee to go 2 minutes over.
I've never objected.
But today it's an issue in the midst of a very important hearing.
Anybody can raise a point of order.
You're absolutely correct.
I'm not blocking anyone from doing that, but I think I have the right. And
you do.
Request the right to preserve that, to raise the point of order when there's an obvious.
It's an excellent point. Now, can we move on? Thank you.
As long as you give me the
Mr. Bishop, or no, Mr. Carter, the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Emergency Management, the gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to the witnesses for joining us today. I'm heartbroken by the innocent lives that have been lost of civilians being targeted by hateful terrorist groups like Hamas. This is outrageous and inevitably leads to tragic consequences. Condemning these atrocities and protecting innocent lives at all costs is pivotal. Our discussion on worldwide threats is important for the American people so we can further address such issues void of partisan brinkmanship. We all must do better. Director Wray, our nation's HBCUs produce some of the brightest who enter our ever-growing workforce. Repeated threats to these institutions have caused widespread disruption on campuses by shutting down classes and campus activity. Mr. Wray, could you please briefly update us on the FBI's activity and things that you're actively doing to monitor and combat such events in the future?
Well, thank you, Congressman. Certainly the threats that we saw against HBCUs were appalling, and there's absolutely no excuse for putting campuses, students, faculty, staff in a position where they can't go about their lives at school in fear. And so we have actively been investigating the threats as they've come in. As you know, there was an arrest related to some of the threats involved a juvenile who was responsible for a number of the threats. I think more importantly, we've doubled down on our engagement with HBCUs. I've personally engaged with a number of HBCU law enforcement heads. We have an increased partnership with campus law enforcement over the last 2 years. That's, including in this recent threat environment, we're very careful to include campus law enforcement in all of our law enforcement partner calls. We have campus liaison officers, in effect, appointed in each one of our field offices to focus specifically on engagement with academia. So that's a big part of it. It's not just the investigations and the analysis, but also the outreach.
How has that been ramped up with the recent hate speak for Muslims and Jewish brothers and sisters and Palestinians? We see this overboiling because of what's happening in the Middle East, spreading and boiling into the college campus environment as well as just our general communities. We know that Hamas is the true threat. But because of these risks, we're seeing this bleed over into a level of hatred for innocent people who have nothing to do with Hamas.
Well, certainly we're in an environment where the number of tips and threats that are being reported to us have gone up significantly since October 7th. We were already, as I testified earlier, already in an elevated threat environment even before October 7th, and it's gone to a whole nother level since October 7th. The biggest chunk of the threats that have been reported into us by a good margin are threats to the Jewish community, synagogues, Jewish prominent officials, things like that. We also have a large number of tips and leads related specifically to Hamas and radicalization and recruitment. We do also have some threats to Muslim Americans that have also been called in. And so we are urgently running down every tip and lead we get and trying to mitigate them and engaging. I think the thing that distinguishes the post-October 7th environment even more than the pre-October 7th environment, one of the things that distinguishes it is how...
Director, I don't want to cut you off. You've got an important job. We appreciate the hard work that you and men and women of your department do. Very quickly, Secretary Mayorkas, the Countering Weapons Mass Destruction CWMD office will sunset. You acknowledge this in your opening remarks. If Congress does not act, I understand that there are a few vehicles which you're working on to ensure that CWMD continues to operate. As you know, last night we passed a temporary measure in the CR that will extend the sunset through February of 2024. If this is not made permanent, if we're not able to move forward with a permanent measure, how does that impact your ability to protect American cities and to protect our country?
Congressman, thank you very much. It is an incredible detriment to our ability to secure the American people. Just in the last 2 days, a local law enforcement officer equipped with some of the equipment that we provide to detect radiological nuclear material, in fact, was wearing a device that detected an abandoned material in a very unsafe location that could have caused a tremendous amount of harm to people in the surrounding community. This is a vital authority that we absolutely need.
Thank you. My time is expired.
The gentleman yields. As a point of order in informing the committee, votes have been called. We're going to do two more members, Mr. Bishop and then Mr. Swalwell. We'll recess and we'll reconvene 10 minutes after the final vote. I now recognize the chairman of the Oversight Subcommittee, Mr. Bishop from North Carolina, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I listen to your opening statements, I'm floored by the fact that I perceive a dramatic shift in the positions of each of you from the hearing that from the testimony that you gave and the way you answered questions just last November. Director Abizaid, I want to begin with you. Last time I asked you this, Director Abizaid, does the National Counterterrorism Center assess a significant threat from the historic level of uncontrolled crossing at the southern border? And your answer was, we don't, actually. The Judiciary Committee has released a document that says there are confirmed 1.7 million gotaways. Maybe one of you has a better number than that. Millions have been processed and released, to the extent that the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, says that New York City is being destroyed. All you are aware of those things. Director Abizaid, do you continue to maintain that there is no material risk of organized terrorism from this massive infiltration, both of people minimally encountered and almost 2 million people neither encountered or vetted whatsoever?
I appreciate the question, and we absolutely recognize the kind of vulnerabilities that are associated with border security across all of our ports of entry, across southwest border and otherwise. But I would maintain, and I talk to my analysts about this on a regular basis, that as we look at the global terrorism environment, as we look at foreign terrorist organizations' intentions to try and seed operatives into the United States, we don't have indications that are credible or corroborated that those terrorist organizations are trying to do that at this time.
You are aware, are you not, ma'am? You remember I made this comment the last time. The 9/11 Commission report talked about the system blinking red. There were obvious risks. Director Wray sat next to you just a few minutes ago, and you've changed your tenor too, Director Wray, and you said that you observed that it took only 20 to take down the World Trade Center. So among 1.7 million coming in, not interdicted by the federal government or any government, why is that not an obvious risk to you that we could have organized terrorism? How many cells could you create of 20 people?
Sir, if I may, I'd like to clarify. We absolutely recognize the risk. In fact, if you look at the kind of counterterrorism enterprise that we've built that's focused on collecting overseas, that's focused on border security, that's focused on screening, vetting, watch listing individuals and terrorist identities, it's absolutely a risk that we understand and a vulnerability that we work very hard over the last 20 years to shore up. So my comments relate to the intelligence about foreign terrorist plans and intentions.
You've deployed that.
It is not a statement about what risk we think we have.
That's even more astonishing. I'll stop you and reclaim my time because you shouldn't be going on. That seems to me even more astonishing because you've sat in this administration almost since its beginning alongside Secretary Mayorkas while elective policies have been pursued to allow that to happen. Uncontrolled immigration processing millions of people through Border Patrol posts and CBP and Border Patrol to overwhelm those agencies so that this unbelievably and unprecedented, historically unprecedented number of gotaways could come through. You've all given it succor. You've all permitted it to happen and said nothing publicly about what you now acknowledge to be a material risk. And it seems to me we're going to see the manifestation of that risk. Secretary Mayorkas, in your testimony, both written and oral today, you said the world has changed since Hamas's attack in October. What's changed about Hamas?
Hamas has been and continues to be a terrorist organization.
Exactly. And so does Hezbollah. And so do all the others, including Al-Qaeda. Nothing's changed. And you have supervised elective policies that have allowed this level of flow into the United States. Isn't that true?
That is not true.
Oh, you haven't done it electively. You couldn't have changed anything to attenuate the flow. Is that your testimony?
Congressman, our policies are directed at securing the border.
Can you give me a quick answer? Are your policies, could you have changed anything to attenuate the flow?
Congressman, we are seeking to address the flow every single day.
Boy, that's amazing. And you've continued to say that sort of thing, and I agree with Mr. Higgins, it doesn't warrant much asking. Let me ask you, Mr. Wray, we've seen now this spectacle of hundreds of thousands of people waving Palestinian flags, attacking the gates of the White House, vandalizing places. You've expended, in fact, so has Mr. Mayorkas, expended tremendous resources to stop foreign malign influence. With millions of people coming into the country unvetted, is that at all a foreign malign influence operation now operating in the United States homeland?
We view it as a threat. I don't think we view it as a foreign malign influence threat, but that's just terminology.
Do you know whether it is or not? In other words, do you know whether those protests are in significant part the product of people who've been allowed into the country, the millions illegally?
We have not seen intelligence that would indicate that. I do want to add, though, Congressman, when it comes to my testimony from last year, I specifically said, and I'm looking at the transcript last year, that we had a concern from a national security perspective, that we'd seen an increase in the number of KSDs attempting to cross over the past 5 years, and I, in fact, specifically brought up the case that we brought against an individual who tried to smuggle in foreign nationals to assassinate.
I'd be working hard to cover my posterior, too. You did say more than the gentleman did, but you didn't come forward and say that what she said was completely wrong, and you should have.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Swalwell, the ranking member of the Cyber Subcommittee, the gentleman from California, for his 5 minutes of questioning, and we will recess after his questioning.
A longtime friend of mine who works in the intelligence community once told me, Eric, that the challenge with our job is that we're only known for our failures, that most Americans have no idea about the successes that we achieve on behalf of the American people every day. And whether it's fentanyl seizures at the border or a terrorist plot that's disrupted, most folks don't know about it and aren't able to thank you for it. And when they do see the work, they see it in a public hearing like today. So I just want to thank you. I also want to thank Director Wray and Secretary Mayorkas for sending to my congressional district a couple weeks ago some of your staff from the special agent in charge in San Francisco to the CISA office to assist us in hosting a cybersecurity summit for our small business community. It was very effective and helpful, and I think they have a better sense of where they should go. Director Wray, I wanted to ask you about the extrajudicial killing of a Sikh leader in Canada that occurred outside of Gurdwara. My district has one of the largest Sikh populations in the United States. An individual, Dr. Pritpal Singh, who's the founder of the American Sikh Caucus, lives in Fremont, which is in my district. He has very publicly acknowledged that he was warned by the FBI about his own safety, and I just want to know what the FBI is doing right now to protect individuals in the Sikh community from any threats to them because of who they worship, what they believe.
So without talking about any investigative work that we're doing, other than to note that part of what you're describing involves an increase in violence and threats against people for their views, for their beliefs. For example, the transnational repression that we talk about so much is certainly a variation of that, and we've seen that from the Chinese and the Iranians, for example. But when it comes to the Sikh community here, we do have quite a number of efforts to engage in outreach, to raise awareness about who to call, what to be on the lookout for, to understand what a hate crime is, for example, because one of the things we know about hate crimes is whether they're against Sikhs or anybody else, is they're chronically underreported, and part of that is for people to understand what a hate crime looks like so they know when to reach out to law enforcement. So we've tried to kind of raise awareness, and it kind of ties into your broader point about the intelligence community in terms of prevention, quietly preventing things. You know, our vision statement is ahead of the threat. And if we are successful in being ahead of the threat, of course, the threat doesn't end up coming to fruition. It's a little bit like being the holder for a place kicker. You can distinguish yourself if the kick goes smoothly, but it's hard not to be noticed if the kick doesn't go well.
At the end of the year, Section 702, Director, expires. And this is a part of the law that allows the intelligence community and law enforcement to investigate and stop threats, credible threats to the United States, to our homeland, to our people from abroad. Could you conceive a greater case of self-sabotage to create a vulnerability to the United States than letting Section 702 lapse at the end of the year?
I think letting 702 lapse would be short-sighted at best and dangerous in the extreme at worst. To be clear, 702 is what allows us to get eyes on foreign threats overseas that pose national security threats to people here in the homeland. And as somebody who was in FBI headquarters on 9/11 and spent an awful lot of my time in the Bush administration in the years after that engaging with the victims and the families of the 9/11 attacks, we should never be in a position where we can't say we did everything constitutionally and legally in our power to see the threats when they're coming. And that's what 702 enables us to do. And especially in this heightened threat environment with, as I said in my opening statement, a rogues gallery of foreign terrorist organizations calling for attacks against us, the idea that we would deliberately blind ourselves to information that is lawfully in our possession just strikes me as crazy.
And do you believe a foreign national terrorist suspect should be afforded the right to a warrant requirement?
No, and I don't think there's any court that suggests otherwise. There's a lot of people throwing around the words unconstitutional in this debate, and yet I don't think there's any court that has found that the way in which 702 is used is in any way a violation of the Fourth Amendment or the Constitution.
Because these are foreign nationals overseas.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.